Number 10. Durdle Door Incidents. For years, the Durdle Door, a rock arch on the Dorset coast of England, has been attracting daredevil cliff jumpers. The massive rock extends from the beach into the water and at its highest point stands at an estimated 200 feet. Striking the water surface from that height, even in the vertical position known as tombstoning, can result in life-altering injuries and even death. On the same day in late May of 2020, several jumpers were hurt while leaping off the cliff. One man in his 20s suffered serious spinal injuries, while a second cliff jumper was left with a broken leg. The closest call, however, was experienced by 20-year-old Irvin Aliyaj, who, as he struck the water on his side, remembered feeling paralyzed. It was the effect of several of his ribs being shattered. He was extremely fortunate that paddleboarder Michael Wiley, after seeing the men performing the dangerous jumps, had positioned himself near the cliff in case anyone needed rescuing. Aliyaj would have drowned if not for Wiley, who pulled him from the water and successfully brought him to shore. Aliyaj was airlifted to a hospital and subsequently recovered. Number 9. Ciara Romero. On January the 4th of 2018, Colorado woman Ciara Romero died in a bungee jumping accident at the Get Air Trampoline Park in Grand Junction. At the site, participants climbed a silo tower and then leapt from a 70-foot tall wooden platform. They free fell roughly 20 feet before being caught by the cord and safely lowered to the ground. 20-year-old Romero's jump went horribly wrong. She somehow became disconnected from her harness and plummeted to her death. An investigation called the accident virtually unprecedented and couldn't identify a clear-cut reason for the tragically failed jump. The state's regulatory body for amusement rides found no safety violations and speculated that Romero's death had been caused by an initial connection between the carabiner and the D-ring on the harness. They weren't, however, able to determine if the connection had been compromised prior to or during the free fall. Number 8. John James. In 2018, Canadian rapper John James plunged to his death in British Columbia. Following a daredevil stunt in which he walked on the wing of an airplane, 34-year-old James had started his career as a professional free skier and became the first to successfully land a backflip, transferring from rail to rail. However, after sustaining multiple injuries, including a broken back and a fractured neck, he began rapping and producing hip-hop music. He ultimately became known for his music videos, which would often feature action sports stunts. For months, James had been practicing intensely for his latest video that would have seen him walk on the wing of a plane while rapping. On October the 20th, he took to the sky in a small Cessna. James walked out on the plane's wing as planned, but as he went further towards the tip, his weight caused the plane to enter a downward spiral that the pilot wasn't able to correct. James was wearing a parachute, but as the Cessna went down, he held onto the wing for too long. By the time he let go, he didn't have time to deploy his parachute. James crashed into the ground and died instantly. Minutes later, the pilot was able to regain control and land safely. James's wife, Playboy model Callie West, his friends and family took to social media to express their regrets at his passing, while a fundraiser was started, with the goal set at $10 million aimed at increasing the outreach of James's music. Number 7. Mary Catherine Connell. In January of 2016, a woman and her instructor perished in an ill-fated base jump off the Bixby Bridge in Big Sur, California. Mary Catherine Connell, a 30-year-old Tennessee native, was described by her family to have had an affinity for adrenaline-inducing activities like base jumping and skydiving. Connell dropped roughly 300 feet and wasn't reported to have encountered problems with the deployment of the parachute. The crux of the matter was that she'd missed her landing spot and fell into Bixby Creek, which feeds into the Pacific Ocean. Connell's companion, Finnish skydiving instructor Rami Kajala, had been filming her jump. Upon seeing her swept away by waves, he dove into the water and attempted to save her. Neither surfaced, and in spite of an extensive search, their bodies were never found. Both were presumed to have drowned after a GoPro with footage of their final moments was found on the beach. The authorities studied it but chose not to release the video. Number 6. Vishnu Viswanath and Meenakshi Murthy. In 2018, a couple fell to their deaths from Taft Point at Yosemite National Park. 29-year-old Vishnu Viswanath and his wife Meenakshi Murthy, aged 30, were popular travel bloggers who'd recently moved to San Jose from New York. From their travels, they'd uploaded numerous photos to their Instagram, some of which featured the thrill-seeking couple skydiving or posing on cliffs. In one of the posts, as Morthy sat on the edge of the Grand Canyon, she admitted to her love of daredevil acts but pondered, "Is our life just worth one photo?" The post would later read as foreshadowing: the day after they'd last been seen at Taft Point, park rangers recovered their bodies from the bottom of the scenic overlook. The couple had plummeted more than 800 feet, which is higher than the Golden Gate Bridge towers. Each had sustained multiple traumatic injuries to the head, neck, chest, and abdomen. It's believed that they'd been taking photos prior to the fatal drop because a tripod had been set up near the cliff's edge. While the specifics of the fall remain unclear, the authorities claim that the couple had alcohol in their system. According to CBS, San Francisco man Sean Mattison may have been one of the last people to have seen Morthy and Viswanath alive. He'd accidentally captured Morthy in a selfie at Taft Point. In the photo, she can be seen in the background over Mattison's shoulder with her distinct pink hair flowing in the wind. Number 5. Anne Liu. In May of 2020, a 24-year-old woman passed away following a tragic wingsuit flying accident at the Tiananmen Mountain National Park in central China's Henan province. The thrill-seeking pilot was identified as university student Anne Liu. She was described as experienced with over 500 flights to her name. Liu leapt from a helicopter at around 8,200 feet, followed by a videographer who recorded her flight. A few seconds into the jump, she started to deviate significantly from her flight path, while also rapidly losing altitude. The videographer tried to pursue Liu, desperately waving to her that she was off course, but was soon forced to abandon the pursuit because he was rapidly approaching the mountain. He adjusted, lost sight of Liu, and subsequently landed safely. The video that the cameraman had captured would end up representing Liu's final moments. The woman was declared missing for 7 days before she was found in a dense wood. Her parachute had not been opened, and she'd sustained devastating injuries in the impact. Media outlets would subsequently refer to Liu as the first Chinese person to die in a wingsuit flying accident. Number 4. Wayne Seeley. In June of 2020, one of the UK's top paragliders died after crashing into power cables that carried 11,000 volts in Eastington, England. As 41-year-old Wayne Seeley approached his landing area at a local school playing field near his home, he phoned his fiancée from the air. Seeley had over 25 years of experience in paragliding, and in March of that same year had completed a cross-country flight of 73 miles. His fiancée went outside and expected to see him land safely on the field. Looking back on the incident, the woman would remember that everything seemed to be in order during his approach. Seeley then maneuvered too close to the power cables and skimmed them with the base of his harness. An eruption of sparks and a massive bang followed. Seeley instantly dropped to the ground in a cloud of smoke. A coroner recorded a verdict of accidental death with electrocution as the primary factor. Number 3. Vincent Raffet. In 2014, Frenchman Vincent Raffet shocked the world when he performed the base jump of the Burj Khalifa, the world's tallest building, setting a world record in the process. After thousands of parachute jumps, he turned his attention to wingsuit flying. Raffet ultimately became part of the Jetman Dubai crew. With carbon Kevlar wings strapped to their backs, pilots use 4 mini-jet engines to power the suit, enabling them to hover, stop, turn, and even perform loops and rolls. The jet wing can reportedly reach speeds of over 150 miles per hour. In February of 2020, Raffet achieved a milestone when he took off from a platform in Dubai. Unlike previous flights, he didn't jump from a tall building or from a helicopter. Thanks to a computerized stabilization system, he was able to take off from the ground, hover, and then fly forward. A clip of the flight, showing Raffet as he soared above the city skyline, was viewed by millions on YouTube. Raffet's passing was mourned by the entire wingsuit flying community, but the particularities of the accident remain unclear. What's known is that in November of 2020, he was training in Dubai. Raffet reportedly lost control after going into a backflip at 800 feet above ground. Protocol, established prior to the flight, dictated that Raffet should deploy the pyro rocket emergency parachute if the jet wing became uncontrollable. For unknown reasons, he didn't do so and fatally crashed into the ground. Number 2. Adam Esteves Gomez Diaz Martins. In October of 2020, Brazilian man Adam Esteves Gomez Diaz Martins suffered a devastating fall after bungee jumping from a bridge in the country's southeast. 25-year-old Martins was in the municipality of Antonio Dias at the Praia Viaduct. The bridge, a popular bungee jumping spot, has an estimated height of 330 feet, meaning that it's about as tall as the Big Ben clock tower. The thrill-seeker jumped from it on October the 4th, but instead of the expected effect of recoiling back up, he crashed into the ground. Martin's companions, some of whom would later be treated for shock, called the emergency services, who pronounced him dead at the scene. The root cause of the incident wasn't revealed, but based on local media reports, his cord was either too long or it had snapped in midair. Number 1. Fard Ibrahim Jamil Al-Lakhma. In 2021, a Syrian thrill-seeker was killed instantly after landing on a tourist boat following a jump off the Rawouche Rocks in Beirut, Lebanon. Onlookers had desperately shouted at Fard Ibrahim Jamil Al-Lakhma not to jump as they saw the boat emerge from a tunnel. However, Al-Lakhma's view of it was likely obstructed by the cliff. He was far away and presumably thought the people in the distance recording his jump with their phones were cheering him on. A harrowing video of the incident later circulated online. Al-Lakhma leapt off the rock, free fell 115 feet, and then struck the boat with his head. He died on the spot and his lifeless body was pulled from the water. The boat's captain was also injured, but he was reported to have survived after being taken to a hospital. Number 12. Carlito Vale and Themba Kabika. Carlito Vale and Themba Kabika attempted to reach London together by illegally boarding a British Airways flight. They hid in a Boeing 747 departing from their native Johannesburg. The two men endured an 8,000-mile journey, though only one of them managed to survive. Vale's body collapsed from the nook they had been hiding in when the landing gear was deployed. His corpse was discovered on a roof close to the airport. Kabika remained in critical condition after being rescued. When he recovered, Kabika was granted a leave to remain in the UK and changed his name to Justin. During the documentary, which was filmed years later, he shared details of what he endured during the flight. He explained how both he and Vale had hidden close to the engine and they could feel it outside, sustaining several burns in the process. He ended up losing consciousness due to lack of oxygen and remembered Vale's last words as being, "We made it." He remembered waking up after landing and seeing guards carrying him away. His leg was broken and he was forced to endure 6 months of treatment before he fully recovered. Kabika discovered Vale had died after being asked to identify him by a police officer. Number 11. Shamsul Ramli. Shamsul Ramli was a teenager when he hid in a Boeing 747's wheel well. The plane departed from Malaysia on March the 17th of 1993. By the time it arrived in Johannesburg, Ramli had already died from severe hypothermia. It wasn't determined why Ramli had decided to take such a risk in order to reach South Africa. It was the third incident to occur at the Subang International Airport in less than a year, prompting authorities to demand an increase in security measures. An investigation was launched to determine how the young man was able to get past the airport's 24-hour surveillance and its regular patrols. Number 10. Unnamed 23-year-old man. An unidentified 23-year-old Chinese man barely managed to survive his stowaway experience over a 3-hour-long flight to Tokyo. He hid before the plane departed from Shanghai, bypassing security personnel. When the aircraft's landing gear was deployed, the unknown man clung to it desperately to avoid falling to the ground. He was discovered by airport staff with his joints stiffened by the freezing temperatures. The man had to be pried loose and was promptly rushed to the hospital. His condition was considered critical, though he miraculously managed to survive. He reportedly had illegally boarded the plane to search for work in Japan. Authorities told the press he'd be facing deportation after being released from the hospital. Number 9. Andrei Sherbakov. Andrei Sherbakov endured a 2-hour flight from Perm to Moscow while hiding in the plane's wheel well. Though he'd managed to survive minus 58-degree temperatures, his condition was considered critical when he was rushed to a Moscow hospital. First responders couldn't remove his coat and shoes, as his limbs had become stiff. After stabilizing him, the clinic refused to continue treating Sherbakov, and he was taken back to Perm. Due to severe frostbite, doctors had to remove his fingertips. With the risk of gangrene spreading further, it had become likely that Sherbakov would end up losing both his hands. Number 8. Victor Alvarez Molina. Victor Alvarez Molina received an urgent call from his wife warning him to leave Cuba at once. Though the threats against his life weren't revealed to the public, Alvarez Molina became desperate enough to hide in an airplane's landing gear as he attempted to leave the island. He managed to survive minus 55 Fahrenheit temperatures during the 4-hour flight to Montreal in 2000. Alvarez Molina suffered from oxygen deprivation and acute hypothermia. Fortunately, he managed to discover a leaky heat pipe that offered him enough oxygen to pull through. When he was discovered, Alvarez Molina was unable to speak and he was treated at a nearby hospital. After being discharged, he was granted refugee status and subsequently managed to get employment at a car dealership. Number 7. Pardeep and Vijay Sainai. Pardeep and Vijay Sainai were 21 and 19 years old respectively when they managed to hide in the nose wheel well of a Boeing 747 heading from New Delhi to London. Vijay didn't survive the 10-hour flight, which reached altitudes of 35,000 feet, while Pardeep miraculously managed to make a full recovery. Both brothers had escaped India after being accused of having ties to a Sikh militant group. This was a death sentence for the Saini siblings, so they paid a smuggler £150 to help them escape to Britain in 1996. They were told they'd be able to reach the luggage compartment but were stranded in the wheel bay instead. Pardeep was allowed to stay after a long legal battle and, as of 2019, resided in Wembley with his wife and 2 sons. Number 6. Mario Steven Ambarita. In 2015, Mario Steven Ambarita rode a Garuda Indonesia flight in the landing gear, attempting to reach the country's capital, Jakarta. Shortly after the plane landed, the 21-year-old man was discovered stumbling on the runway. He was apprehended by the police and received medical treatment while he was detained. Ambarita confessed to studying planes taking off and landing schedules for an entire year while planning to secure a free ride. His wounds were considered minimal, though he had to endure freezing conditions during the 2-hour-long flight. Ambarita made a full recovery and faced a 1-year prison sentence if found guilty of endangering the Garuda flight. Number 5. Trevor Jacobs. Wanted man Trevor Jacobs was being charged with several crimes, including kidnapping, when he attempted to escape by hiding in an MD-80 landing gear. He was a former Antiguan police officer. His body was discovered during a routine inspection when the plane arrived at Trinidad. Jacobs was unable to survive the extreme conditions during the flight, and his body was identified with fingerprints and a photograph sent from Antigua. Jacob and his partner, Sylvester Joseph, were accused of abducting Donna Pietra Cooper, a 60-year-old senior resident. She was fortunately released unharmed soon after, and Joseph was charged with her kidnapping. Number 4. Marco Vinicio and Luis Manuel. Teenagers Marco Vinicio and Luis Manuel tragically died as they fell off a Boeing 767 during takeoff. They had attempted to travel as stowaways from Guayaquil to New York in February of 2018. The friends managed to hide in the plane's landing gear, but as the aircraft departed, they lost their balance and fell 1,000 feet onto the ground. That's almost akin to dropping from the tip of the Eiffel Tower. When airport staff rushed to the scene, they were shocked to discover 2 young men on the runway, along with a suitcase containing clothes and $20 in cash. Though one of the teenagers was already dead, the other was critically injured and passed away 10 minutes later before he could be treated by first responders. It's unclear if the 2 men had fallen after being pushed out of the compartment by the plane's gears or if they attempted to jump after having second thoughts. Authorities managed to identify the bodies, discovering they were cousins attempting to leave their native Ecuador. The plane was required to circle back 3 hours after takeoff. Number 3. Samuel Peter Benjamin. In 2007, Samuel Peter Benjamin hid in a Boeing 747 traveling from Cape Town to Los Angeles. He's believed to have stowed away in the plane a week before his body was discovered. After this initial flight, the plane continued traveling to new destinations, such as Hong Kong, Singapore, and Vancouver. Eventually, though, during a routine check, the pilot found the frozen corpse while preparing to return to Heathrow. Testing the body would take the coroner's office several weeks due to the condition it was found in. Authorities told the press they'd be repatriating the body after their investigation was concluded. Benjamin's family was shocked when they were informed of his death. His mother said that the young man had left without telling them where he was headed. Number 2. Emilio Dominguez. 23-year-old Emilio Dominguez planned to leave his native Honduras, desperate to find work abroad. This led him to illegally boarding a ride on an Iberia Airlines flight headed to Miami by hiding in the wheel well. When the plane landed, a ramp agent noticed Dominguez dropping from his left rear wheel, attempting to make an escape. He was weakened, however, and only managed to stagger away. Moments later, paramedics, police officers, and immigration officials arrived at the scene. Dominguez was visibly disoriented, but otherwise uninjured. He received medical attention at the scene, but his condition was stable enough that he didn't require hospitalization. This surprised first responders, as the young man was only wearing jeans, a short-sleeved shirt, and boots. Dominguez was taken into custody and informed he'd be deported back to Honduras on the following flight. Number 1. Fidel Maruji. In 2000, Fidel Maruji illegally boarded a plane leaving his native Tahiti, heading to Paris. The 24-year-old man had hid in the undercarriage of a Boeing 747 and gone unnoticed until the aircraft arrived at Los Angeles International Airport for a scheduled stopover. While the plane was being refueled, airport staff reported seeing a blanket sticking out of a compartment. Upon further examination, they discovered Maruji lying unconscious in the undercarriage. His body temperature had dropped to 79 Fahrenheit. To put things into perspective, when a person's body temperature lowers between 91 and 85, they're usually unable to walk, feel drowsy, and potentially fall into a stupor. Between 85 and 71, they may become unable to move or react to stimuli. Their blood pressure will drop, and they might slip into a coma. Maruji was dehydrated and suffering from acute hypothermia. After being treated for his condition and making a full recovery, Maruji was prosecuted. He revealed that he'd wanted to travel to Paris to shake hands with Zinedine Zidane, a French soccer champion. Number 15. Anna Urso. Romanian teenager Anna Urso suffered a deadly electric shock while attempting to take what she described as the ultimate selfie. The 18-year-old climbed on a stationary train and lay down to take the picture, unfortunately, as she posed by reaching up with one of her legs. Urso hit an overhead live wire. She was shocked with over 27,000 volts, and her body burst into flames. The teenager was later pronounced dead at a hospital in the northern city of Iași after suffering gruesome burns on over half her body. Number 14. Unnamed English hiker. An unnamed English hiker was fatally struck by lightning while traveling through Brecon Beacons National Park in Wales. It's believed that as he was preparing to take a picture, the metal rod of the selfie stick that the young man was carrying attracted the electrical bolt. An unexpected thunderstorm gave air rescue little time to locate the hiker. By the time he was found, in spite of resuscitation attempts, the man was pronounced dead. Number 13. Madeline Davis. 21-year-old Instagram model Madeline Davis fell to her death 100 feet while taking a selfie at the Diamond Bay Reserve in Sydney. The British tourist had been backpacking in Thailand before she arrived in Australia in January of 2020. After a party on Saturday night, Davis and a few of her friends went to the cliffs, which were described as a hotspot for tourists looking to take pictures for their social media. Davis was hoping to capture a sunrise selfie and jumped a security fence in order to get closer to the cliff's edge. A tragic misstep, however, would send the young model plummeting to her death. Her body was recovered from the water roughly 4 hours after emergency services were called. According to her family, Davis struggled with her accidental social media fame and the negativity that came with it. In the accident's aftermath, the family reportedly faced a wave of hurtful comments regarding her death, which prompted them to campaign against cyberbullying. Number 11. US train selfie accident. In October of 2011, 3 American teenagers died while taking a selfie with an incoming train. Essa Ricker and Kelsey Webster, both 15, and Kelsey's sister Savannah, were distracted while posing on the track. Savannah had posted to her Facebook, "Standing right by a train. Haha, this is awesome." According to conductor John Anderson, there was no reaction from the girls, even as the horn was blaring. Once the emergency brakes are activated, it can take as much as a mile before a train traveling at 55 miles per hour can come to a full stop. Anderson claimed that he and the engineer that was with him only saw the girls for about 12 seconds before they disappeared. As the teenagers squeezed in for their final selfie, lights from the train that ended their lives could be seen in the background. Number 10. Xu Xingyu. A tourist visiting the Indonesian island of Nusa Lembongan died after she was swept away by a large wave as she was trying to take a selfie. 21-year-old Xu Xin Yu and her partner were at a scenic landmark called Devil's Tears. She'd climbed a security fence in order to get closer to the waves as they struck the cliffs. With her back turned to the water, the young woman was struck by a large wave and dragged into the water. Xu's partner and others in their group saw that she'd fallen in, but the sea was too rough for anyone to jump after her. Unfortunately, the woman drowned before a rescue boat arrived at her position. Number 9. Alexander Chechich. Russian man Alexander Chechich from the southwestern city of Labinsk was killed instantly in a selfie accident involving a hand grenade. Chechich was messaging a friend while taking photos in his car with the explosive weapon after he'd taken the pin out. He'd sent similar pictures to other friends in the past. According to one source, Chechich didn't manage to put the pin back in. Police suspect that he thought the grenade wouldn't go off as long as he didn't throw it. As the weapon exploded, Chechich's body was torn in half. The authorities ruled off suicide and categorized his death as an accident. Number 8. Courtney Sanford. In April of 2014, North Carolina woman Courtney Sanford crashed her car while taking selfies. Minutes before she veered off the road, the woman had been posting pictures online and talking about how much she enjoyed the song Happy by Pharrell. At the time of the accident, she was going about 45 miles per hour and was wearing a seatbelt that reportedly wasn't properly fastened. Sanford hit a recycling truck, but the driver was unharmed. She then crashed into a tree and her car burst into flames. Sanford died instantly. The US Department of Transportation referred to 2014 as the year of the selfie. 33,000 people were injured while driving and using their cell phones. In a subsequent study, more than 4% of all drivers admitted to taking a selfie while they were behind the wheel. Number 7. Oscar Reyes. 18-year-old Oscar Reyes died while taking part in an online trend called Selfie Game 2014. On January the 2nd, the teenager had posted a selfie of himself in a SpongeBob costume. The attention that the post had earned him convinced Reyes to take another selfie. This time he wore his costume while hanging onto the bathroom door. Unfortunately, he slipped and took a hard fall. Reyes severely injured his head and died from excessive bleeding. Number 6. Prabhu Batara. While driving guests home from a wedding in the province of Odisha, Indian man Prabhu Batara spotted a massive animal near the road. As he got closer, Batara realized it was a bear which appeared to be wounded. The species, believed to have been a sloth bear, is often described as the most aggressive bear on the planet. Nevertheless, Batara decided to approach the animal as it was drinking from a pond, with plans of taking a selfie with it. Others in the car pleaded with him not to do so, but the man couldn't be dissuaded. Getting close to the sloth bear would prove to be a fatal decision. Batara was knocked down by the animal, which proceeded to maul him. He struggled to get up, but was swiftly brought down again with blows to the head and neck. Others tried throwing rocks or striking the animal with a stick, and even a stray dog intervened, but to no avail. The bear mauled Batara to death, and forest rangers had to tranquilize it in order to retrieve the man's body. Number 5. Train selfie accident. In April of 2017, 5 friends, all aged 25 to 30, were traveling on an Indian train when one of them leaned out of the door for a daredevil selfie attempt. The man then took a wrong step and fell out of the train. His companions, in an effort to save him, jumped out as well. Tragically, as they did so, a train coming from the opposite direction struck them. The impact was devastating. The 4 of them were mowed down and died instantly. The man who'd fallen from the train succumbed to his injuries in a hospital. Number 4. Hidito Ueda. While visiting the Taj Mahal in September of 2015, a Japanese tourist took a fatal misstep. 66-year-old Hidito Ueda was reportedly trying to take a selfie with the Grand Mausoleum's Royal Gate. The man then lost his balance and fell backwards on the steps of the 17th century monument. Paramedics took him away as he'd suffered massive head trauma. Ueda died in the hospital, and a post-mortem report claimed that he'd also suffered a heart attack as a result of the fall. Number 3. David Gonzalez Lopez. During the 2014 edition of the annual Running with the Bulls in Pamplona, Spain, a man suffered fatal injuries in a selfie-related incident. David Gonzalez Lopez jumped over a safety barrier and tried to take a selfie with two bulls as they were about to collide. With his back turned to the beast, Lopez failed to notice a third bull that was charging towards him. The massive animal gored the 32-year-old man in the neck and thigh. According to reports from eyewitness reports, Lopez was thrown through the air like a rag doll. The man was rushed to the hospital and given over 4 pints of blood. Unfortunately, his injuries were too severe and he was later pronounced dead. Number 2. Francois Guillaume. Francois Guillaume was visiting Chile's El Tatio Giza in October of 2015, when she suffered an accident that would prove fatal. El Tatio is a coveted tourist destination due to the columns of searing water that shoot into the air every day. As the 68-year-old Belgian woman was taking selfies, she fell into a hot spring that would cause severe burns on 80% of her body. Her husband also suffered burns to his arms as he rescued her. The scalding water had ravaged Guillaume's flesh, and she died in a Santiago hospital a few days later. Number 1. Amritpal Singh. 2 lives were lost in May of 2014 after a Cessna 150 crashed into a Colorado wheat field. The aircraft was piloted by 29-year-old Amritpal Singh. Sources claim that he'd frequently text and take selfies while flying. Prior to the crash, Singh was once again engaging in his usual reckless behavior. The distraction would cause him to lose control of the airplane. The impact killed Singh and the passenger that was on board. The pilot's GoPro camera was subsequently retrieved from the crash. It revealed many mid-flight selfies taken by Singh at what appeared to be dangerously low altitudes. Number 10. Amber Bellows. Experienced base jumper Amber Bellows jumped off Mount Kennesaw in Zion National Park, Utah. The 28-year-old Salt Lake City resident took the 2,000-foot leap, but much to witnesses' shock, her parachute never deployed. Bellows had been married for all of 2 weeks when the accident occurred. Her husband attempted to rescue her but was unable to reach her, though Bellows' spouse contacted park employees soon after. The search for her body didn't begin until the following morning. This was due to the fact that it wasn't considered a rescue mission and the area was remote. Bellows' body had to be recovered via helicopter. Base jumping wasn't allowed in Zion National Park. Though authorities lamented the loss of a life, they warned the public that the potentially lethality of this extreme sport is the reason why it's forbidden in the location. Number 9. Dave Reeder. One of the greatest risks of base jumping is striking objects during the fall. This is exactly what happened to Dave Reeder back in 2016. The 23-year-old man was practicing this extreme sport in the French Alps when his parachute failed to open. He suffered massive head trauma, which was so severe there was nothing first responders could do to help. Reeder was rushed to the hospital where he remained in a coma for less than 24 hours. The following day, the young thrill seeker was pronounced dead. His organs were donated and reportedly helped save 6 lives. Number 8. Mary Catherine Connell and Rami Kajala. Mary Catherine Connell, known to her friends and family as Katie, was an experienced base jumper. She had participated in 300 different leaps when she decided to try a jump at Bixby Bridge in California. Rami Kajala, an instructor, accompanied her, ready to film the experience with his GoPro camera. He owned a business centered on this extreme sport. Connell suffered an unknown complication on her way down, and Kajala watched in horror as he realized she was drowning. Jumping behind her, he descended 300 feet, determined to save her. Unfortunately, neither of them would resurface. Their bodies were recovered later that same day. Number 7. Shane McConkey. Professional skier and base jumper, Shane McConkey was considered a gifted athlete at the time of his death in March of 2009. He enjoyed such acclaim that he was added to the Ski and Snowboard Hall of Fame not long before his untimely demise. He combined skiing and base jumping, pushing the limits each time. While visiting a mountain in the Italian Dolomites, he suffered an unexpected accident. His skis malfunctioned, failing to release in time. This prompted McConkey to spin out of control. By the time he managed to resettle, it was already too late. The young sportsman failed to deploy his parachute in time, crashing against the ground. He didn't survive the fall, though emergency services were called immediately after his accident. Number 6. Mario Richard. At 47, Mario Richard was well known for his stunts that often involved using wingsuits while base jumping. He was married to a professional climber, and the couple often participated in sports activities together. His wife had managed to jump without any inconvenience moments before what would become Richard's last leap. As wingsuits provide the user with a low margin for error, Richard knew he was taking a great risk, but he loved the thrill it provided him with. Unfortunately, his parachute didn't deploy correctly, and he plummeted to his death. Number 5. Dean Potter and Graham Hunt. A lover of extreme outdoor sports, Dean Potter had experience with activities such as free climbing and base jumping. He broke 2 different records during his career, including climbing one of the hardest paths in Yosemite Valley in just over 35 hours. He participated in several films related to the sports he loved and created controversy climbing locations that forbade this practice. His defiant attitude caused Potter to lose one of the sponsors that supported him. His love for breaking the rules would ultimately lead to his death in 2015. Potter, accompanied by Graham Hunt, decided to perform a proximity wingsuit base jump in Yosemite Valley. The 2 men crashed, unable to dodge the multiple obstacles on their way down. They died on impact, neither having the opportunity of deploying their parachutes. Number 4. Angelo Grubasic. Angelo Grubasic wasn't only a base jumper but also a space scientist. He once worked for NASA researching spacecraft propulsion and designed wingsuits with a focus on making them safer. Though he was well aware of both its theory and practice, he died while attempting a leap at the age of 38. Grubasic participated in a type of base jumping known as proximity flying. The objective is to stay in close proximity to the surrounding landscapes. During his last adventure, he crashed against a ridge at 108 miles per hour. The force of the impact killed him instantly. Number 3. Sean Leary. Sean Leary was well known as a professional climber and stuntman, considered one of the best of his generation. Leary set several records, including for speed climbing, the Salath Wall and the Nose in Yosemite National Park. He soon added base jumping to his hobbies, practicing it all over the Americas, from the US to La Patagonia. He would make his last leap in Zion National Park, Utah. While working as a guide on a film, it's believed that Leary didn't notice a notch on the mountain while falling and struck it hard, rendering him unable to deploy his parachute. The stuntman plummeted 100 feet to his death. Since he'd gone alone, no one knew what had happened until the next day, when his wife read an email from his employer asking why he hadn't shown up for the shooting. That was when a search party was gathered, which concluded with the discovery of Leary's body hours later. Number 2. Alexander Polly. A legendary stuntman who uploaded videos of his jumps on YouTube, Alexander Polly was no stranger to danger. He regularly traveled the world, leaping from different mountains and high spots. His last jump would be in the French Alps when he was merely 31 years old. Polly crashed against a tree while free-falling in an area where accidents are commonplace. He was declared dead on sight. In the years leading up to his death, the stuntman had told a journalist that he prepared well for every jump as a way of dealing with the dangers of the sport he loved. Number 1. Carl Bonisch. The man considered the father of base jumping, Carl Bonisch was also one of its earliest victims. Bonisch was a cinematographer who filmed several of his leaps back in 1978 and participated in a number of movies on the subject. 2 days after achieving the highest jump record up to 1984, his body was discovered on a small glacier. He had attempted a solo jump when he sustained fatal injuries. It was unknown exactly what happened during the fall, but Bonisch lost control and crashed. The impact was so strong that it instantly killed him. 2 climbers discovered the body soon after his accident. Only 48 hours after his death, Bonisch's wife Jean decided to attempt the same jump that had killed him to honor his memory. She was successful, but it was the last time she practiced their beloved sport in that location. Number 9. Katie Malone. For her 29th birthday, San Diego woman Katie Malone went parasailing in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. At some point during the ride, the rope connecting her to the boat broke, and she flew untethered for 45 minutes. Malone eventually crashed into a local airport building, sustaining severe injuries. The woman was left with 4 fractured ribs, a collapsed lung, fractures to her skull and pelvis, as well as a broken jaw and cheekbone. Her pituitary gland had increased in size tenfold, and after being treated at a local hospital, she was airlifted to her home state for further surgery. Over a dozen screws were required to reset her bones, and a titanium mesh was implanted in her skull. Fortunately, Malone would eventually make a full recovery. Number 8. Glenn Hudson. In 2010, Glenn Hudson and his daughter Emma were on a tandem parasailing ride in Turkey. They'd been flying for about 10 minutes and Glenn was telling his daughter about his past parasailing experiences. Moments later, the 50-year-old's harness suddenly snapped. He suffered a fatal 150-foot fall onto the beach below. To put that drop into perspective, it would be like falling from the top of the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. Glenn died upon impact. The owner of the company and the boat's driver were subsequently jailed for criminal negligence. Number 7. Roger Hussey. In 2017, as he was visiting Kata Beach in Phuket, Thailand, Roger Hussey decided to try out parasailing. Shortly after taking off, the 71-year-old Australian man accidentally unbuckled his harness and fell into the shallow water below. Hussey waved his arms as he rose, but when he placed them back on the harness, it's believed that he squeezed the release clips. The fall happened before dozens of horrified onlookers, including Hussey's Thai-born wife, who was filming him from the beach. The 100-foot drop was fatal. The parasailing company admitted to operating the boat without a technician on board, which is illegal. In the accident's aftermath, shocking footage emerged of the operator's staff engaged in dangerous behavior. They rode the rigging's worn straps alongside tourists while barefooted and wearing no safety equipment whatsoever. Number 6. Sydney Good and Alexis Fairchild. In July of 2013, Sydney Good and Alexis Fairchild went on a parasailing ride while vacationing in Panama City, Florida. The girls, both 17 at the time, were caught in strong winds as they reached roughly 1,000 feet, a height comparable to that of the Eiffel Tower. Then the tow rope snapped and the Indiana teenagers drifted helplessly through the air. They crashed into the 13th floor of a condominium before falling to the parking lot below and landing on parked cars. They were taken to a hospital in critical condition. Both had suffered multiple fractures, as well as severe head and spine injuries that required titanium plates and screws to mend. Good suffered permanent damage to her vision that would prevent her from ever driving again. The brain damage they sustained caused them to read at a grade school level. Still, the teens made a surprising recovery and even walked on stage for their high school graduation. Number 5. Anthony and Grace Nesbitt. 20-year-old Anthony Nesbitt and his younger sister Grace narrowly escaped with their lives after a parasailing accident in Malta. They were caught in a freak storm that snapped the tow rope attached to their boat. The watercraft itself was battered by strong waves and pushed dangerously close to the shore. The siblings tried not to panic as the wind swept them inland. Anthony told his sister that they should use their feet to break the fall. After they landed, the parasail dragged them for several feet, but as they slowed down, people intervened and detached them from the canopy. Amazingly, they survived their ordeal with only some cuts and bruises. Number 4. Nicholas Haywood. In July of 2020, Nicholas Haywood and his girlfriend, Azalia Silva, were involved in a brutal parasailing accident in Florida's Key West. It's been reported that the boat's captain had a cowboy attitude and took the couple out in spite of harsh weather. According to other passengers on the boat, he ignored their screams to slow down as waves battered the watercraft. The winds were estimated at 34 miles per hour, and Florida laws prohibit parasailing if they're over 25. The tandem parasail managed to rise, but was then violently thrown to the water by a powerful gust of wind. 36-year-old Haywood was pronounced dead at the scene, while Silva, who was airlifted to a hospital in critical condition, survived. A lawsuit against the parasailing operator was subsequently filed on behalf of Haywood's 10-year-old son and his mother. Number 3. Margaret Beeman and Lisa Smith. In October of 2008, friends Margaret Beeman and Lisa Smith were celebrating a birthday in Riviera Maya, south of the Mexican resort town of Cancun. The women decided to take part in a parasailing experience. Unfortunately, while they were high in the air, the rope connecting the rigging to the boat snapped. Winds pushed the canopy into the water in a rocky area. It then caught air again and finally became trapped in a palm tree. Beeman and Smith succumbed to severe head and body trauma. The blame for the accident rested with the boat's captain, as the area had been closed off to navigation due to harsh weather. Number 2. Kathleen Miskell. In August of 2012, a worn-out parasailing harness caused 28-year-old Kathleen Miskell to suffer a fatal fall. The incident happened off Florida's Pompano Beach. At the time, Miskell was strapped into a tandem ride with her husband, Stephen. When the harness failure occurred, the man could do nothing but watch helplessly as Kathleen free fell roughly 200 feet. She was later found floating face down in the water. Rescuers attempted CPR, but it was already too late. According to a coroner's report, the woman had suffered massive blunt force trauma and cardiac arrest. Number 1. Mark Mitrofanov. While vacationing in Turkey's Antalya resort, 18-year-old Mark Mitrofanov lost his life in a parasail ride gone wrong. The Russian teenager was on a tandem canopy with his mother, Tatiana, when the towing cable broke, roughly 200 feet above sea level. Winds carried the canopy inland, and consequently, the mother and son crashed into the grounds of a beachside hotel, striking a palm tree. Tatiana survived the collision with a blackened eye and cuts on her face. Mark's injuries, however, were far more severe. The teenager sustained severe head trauma, and he died on the operating table. Number 8. Smiler Incident. Found at Alton Towers in the UK, the Smiler roller coaster owns the world record for most inversions, with riders being turned upside down 14 times. A major attraction at the park, the Smiler promised an exhilarating experience, but its reputation was marred by an incident that occurred on June the 2nd of 2015. On that day, 5 people were severely injured after a train carrying 16 passengers collided with a stationary empty train. The latter had been dispatched for a test run and stalled because of a gust of wind. The ride's automated block system consequently shut it down, but the park's engineers overrode it because they were unaware that the empty train was present on the tracks. The train carrying the passengers thus crashed into it. 2 riders seated at the front, 19-year-old Vicky Balk and Leah Washington, age 17, suffered horrific injuries. Balk's right leg and Washington's left leg required partial amputation. The latter's boyfriend was hospitalized with 2 broken kneecaps and extensive hand injuries. He would later remember, "I could just see blood, bone and flesh splattered on the carriage in front." Daniel Thorpe, age 27, was left with a collapsed lung and a fractured leg. Chanda Chauhan, seated on the Smiler's second row, needed surgery after having suffered blood clots and a damaged liver. The victims sued the park in the accident's aftermath, and its owners admitted blame. Balk and Washington, who'd struggled adapting to life as amputees, reportedly received a multi-million-dollar payout, while other victims were also compensated with 6-figure sums. Number 7. Anthony Tyson. In March of 2014, a Wisconsin man was left in critical condition following a roller coaster incident at the Mount Olympus theme park. 63-year-old Anthony Tyson was riding in the same cart as his wife Kay on the indoor Opa Twister Steel roller coaster. Looking back on the incident, Kay remembered that her husband's lap bar became unlocked as they went around the corner. He was launched into the air like a rag doll and impacted the concrete floor, sustaining devastating injuries. Tyson suffered 4 fractured vertebrae, broken toes and fingers, a dislocated shoulder, a shattered scapula, and life-threatening brain damage. He was bleeding from the head but breathing on his own when the emergency services arrived at the scene. Tyson spent several days in a coma, and while he did wake up from it, the long-term effects of his brain injury remained to be determined. A police officer inspected the ride and checked the 4 lap bars on Tyson's cart several times. 3 remained locked, but the 4th, where the victim had been sitting, came loose every time. Opa was permanently closed after the incident. Number 6. Rosa Esparza. In July of 2013, Rosa Esparza, age 52, fell to her death from the new Texas Giant roller coaster at Six Flags Over Texas in Arlington. Once the tallest wooden roller coaster in the world, the ride was modified between 2009 and 2011, a refurbishment in which steel tracks were introduced. However, even though the renovated roller coaster had increased in height and came to include a steeper drop angle, the safety features in the carts reportedly didn't undergo an upgrade. That would change following Esparza's tragic death. According to eyewitnesses, the woman had expressed concerns regarding her lap bar, which hadn't come all the way down, yet it did go close far enough for a computer to register it as locked. As the roller coaster reached a peak, Esparza was ejected from her seat and fell to her death an estimated 75 feet. her partially severed body was found wrapped around a support beam on the aluminium roof of the Honky Tonk Tunnel. The woman's daughter, who subsequently sued the park, was riding in the cart ahead with her husband and witnessed Esparza being thrown from the roller coaster. As per the lawsuit, she then had to spend an interminable time on the ride, unaware of her mother's fate. The suit was eventually settled for an undisclosed sum without an admission of fault on the park's behalf. New Texas Giant was closed following the incident and reopened in September of that same year with redesigned restraint bars, pads, and seatbelts installed on all its trains. Number 5. Dawn Yankovic. On June the 4th of 2021, Ohio woman Dawn Yankovic was found unresponsive next to her 17-year-old son after riding the Voyage roller coaster at Indiana's Holiday World and Splashin' Safari theme park. 47-year-old Yankovic was later pronounced dead at a local hospital, but her passing was considered a mystery as the ride didn't appear to have any malfunctions or safety violations. According to her teenage son, Gunnar, who wasn't hurt in the incident, the woman hadn't been feeling sick and was fine the whole entire day. Then, the coroner's report was released, which identified the tearing of an artery, severe internal blood loss, and force from the roller coaster as the main factors in her death. The G-force of the ride had caused the rupture of her internal thoracic artery. The blood vessel is paired, meaning there's one on each side of the body, and it runs from the clavicle to the rib cage, supplying the chest wall with blood from the heart. Some roller coasters subject riders to over 5 Gs, which is similar to the forces experienced by drag racers. Repetitive sequences of acceleration and deceleration cause a jerking of the neck, which can lead to a torn artery. If small, it will generally heal on its own, but in more serious cases, such as Yankovic's, it can result in a fatal loss of blood. Number 4. Formula One accident. In July of 2020, a 32-year-old woman suffered a fatal fall from a roller coaster in Oise, southern France. The woman was reportedly celebrating her 2-year-old child's birthday at Parc Saint-Paul, approximately 50 miles north of Paris. It was her first visit to the theme park, and she went on the Formula One coaster alongside her husband. According to eyewitnesses, as the roller coaster made a turn, she was thrown from her seat and over the safety barrier. Her husband desperately tried to catch her by the feet, but it was to no avail. The woman's bloodied body was later found at the bottom of the roller coaster. The emergency services immediately arrived at the scene, but they were unable to revive her. It's unclear if the ride's operators would be held accountable for her death, but the Formula One coaster does have a dark past. In 2009, a 35-year-old woman died of cardiac arrest after being thrown from it. However, Le Parisien reported that an investigation concluded she'd exhibited inappropriate behavior on the ride and didn't find the park liable for her death. Number 3. Sandblaster incident. In June of 2018, 9 people were hospitalized following the derailment of a train from the Sandblaster roller coaster in Daytona Beach, Florida. Mother of 2, Amanda Bostic, aged 34, was among those who were injured. She and the co-worker were on a business trip from Kentucky when they decided to go on the ride. Bostic remembered that from the outset, the roller coaster didn't feel stable and kept shaking. It then started gaining speed. Bostic and her colleague were seated at the front when, after making a turn, the roller coaster derailed. The front car was left dangling with its nose pointing down, barely attached to anything except for the car behind it. Amidst the metallic screeching and terrified screams, Bostic fell 35 feet, bouncing off support beams like a pinball. She survived but suffered a concussion, chipped teeth, a foot injury, and a massive bruise on her arm. Rescuers moved swiftly, but some riders were trapped for over half an hour, afraid to move for fear of causing the roller coaster to drop further down. In the aftermath, an investigation revealed a number of problems with the ride, including safety cables improperly secured, cracked supports, as well as a number of damaged deck braces. Number 2. La Feria tragedy. In September of 2019, 2 people were killed and 5 others were injured at La Feria amusement park in Mexico City after a roller coaster flew off its tracks and plunged into the ground. A mechanical failure on a ride called the Quimera caused the car to come loose and fall from an estimated height of 35 feet. Videos that subsequently circulated on social media would show it nearly flipping upside down and then crashing into a metal loop. A park vendor reported seeing one rider as he was sent flying from the cart and several others hitting their heads as the roller coaster derailed at speed. With the final cart dangling behind it, the authorities didn't release the identities of the victims, but they were reported as two males aged 18 and 25. The police launched an investigation while treating the incident as a case of negligent homicide. Number 1. James Hackemer. In July of 2011, U.S. Army Sergeant James Hackemer died in a roller coaster accident at the Darien Lake theme park in upstate New York. 29-year-old Hackemer was a local hero and an Iraq War veteran. In 2008, during his second tour in the country, his vehicle was hit by an improvised explosive device. He was left with horrific injuries that resulted in the loss of both his legs, 2 strokes, brain damage, and 6 weeks spent in a coma. In the following years, he relearned how to eat, speak, and write, with the support of his family. Upon arriving at Darien Lake, according to his sister Jody, Hackemer was determined to ride every roller coaster. In the afternoon, he went on the Superman ride of steel. Jody would later tell a media outlet that for the minute or so that he'd spent on the roller coaster, he probably felt the happiest and most normal he's felt in 3.5 years. Hackemer, a father of 2 young daughters, was accompanied on the ride by a college-age nephew. Tragically, as the roller coaster reached the 50-mile-per-hour mark, Hackemer fell off it, sustaining fatal injuries. In the aftermath, a rumor circulated that the veteran had been told by a park employee that he could go on all the rides. In reality, as recounted by his nephew, no one had challenged whether him going on the roller coaster would pose an issue, and Hackemer himself never asked. He wasn't height-checked, and the Ride of Steel's operator failed to notice he was a double amputee. As a result, he was thrown from the ride. A wrongful death lawsuit would later be settled for a 7-figure sum that would go towards his daughters. Number 11. George Tracy. In June of 2020, water skiing enthusiast George Tracy died in an accident that involved the handle of his tow rope. 69-year-old Tracy was a lifelong water skier who, after retiring from the plumbing business he owned in Florida's Vero Beach, dedicated himself to the sport full-time. He took part in competitions and even earned prizes in his age group. Tracy's favorite spot was a small lake east of Interstate 95, which is where his fatal accident occurred. He was on his last lap, towed behind a 19-foot ski nautique boat, when he fell and his head got caught in the tow line handle, with the boat dragging Tracy behind it at roughly 32 miles per hour. The man suffered a broken neck. While rare, such accidents have occurred in the past, prompting water skiers to use guards on their handles. Number 10. Mike Flynn. In February of 2014, Mike Flynn was training for the Nautique Big Dog tournament in Guadalajara, Mexico. The 48-year-old was an experienced water skier who worked as an EMT and a firefighter. As he was cutting the water's surface at high speed, one of his skis became detached from its binding. Flynn fell forward in the water, at which point the tip of his ski struck him in the face. Flynn hadn't realized the severity of his injury until he went to the bathroom to clean the blood off his face. It was then that he noticed the bridge of his nose had become a gaping hole. It was mended through an 8-hour surgery, during which 84 screws were inserted into Flynn's skull, along with mesh and webbing. Number 9. Sarah Tilo. Australian water skier Sarah Tilo had started competing since she was in her early teens, and in 2013, she won the Water Ski Racing World Championship. Unfortunately, that same year, the 20-year-old athlete would suffer a fatal accident. On November the 24th, she was taking part in a race on Hawkesbury River in North Sydney. Tilo passed under a railway bridge at about 85 miles per hour. Her boat driver then slowed down due to incoming minor waves. The water skier passed the first wave, but then suffered a devastating wipeout. She cartwheeled along the water with both her ski and helmet becoming detached. After on-site resuscitation attempts, Tilo was airlifted to Royal North Shore Hospital in critical condition. She was placed on life support but succumbed to her injuries later that day. The high-speed collision with the water's surface impacted her head and neck, causing internal decapitation. In medical terms, the injury is known as atlanto-occipital dislocation, and it describes a separation of the spinal column from the skull base. Less than a third of cases in which it occurs do not result in immediate death. Number 8. Carl Brooks. In 2007, British water skier Carl Brooks was in peak form as the reigning European champion and as the third-ranked water ski racer in the world. In June, he was training at Lake Mead, near Las Vegas, where he suffered a fatal wipeout. 25-year-old Brooks, who was referred to as the David Beckham of water skiing, fell while going anywhere from 80 to 100 miles per hour. To put that into perspective, Brooks had achieved a greater speed than the average fastball thrown in baseball. Since the water can't displace fast enough, impacting its surface at that speed is akin to hitting concrete. Brooks suffered severe head injuries. His teammates took him to shore, and a park ranger fought to save his life for 30 minutes, but he was ultimately pronounced dead. Number 7. Sue Erhardt. In 1977, Sue Erhardt and her friends decided to go water skiing at San Diego's Silver Strand. 31-year-old Erhardt had had a few runs when a boat malfunction resulted in her suffering a horrific injury. The shifting mechanism had failed, and as the driver powered the watercraft to go forward, it went into reverse. Erhardt was standing behind the boat at the time and was struck by its propeller. The woman's left leg was severed completely, while the rapidly rotating device also cut deeply into her right leg. She was rushed to a Coronado hospital, where doctors were able to save her life. After several months of hospitalization, Erhardt was cleared to return home. She was fitted with a prosthetic leg and gradually adapted to her new life, even becoming an avid golfer in her later years. Number 6. Unnamed teenager. In 2019, an unnamed Australian teenager was left in critical condition following a water skiing accident on the Cooks River in Sydney South. The 15-year-old was taking part in a pre-selection event for the World Racing Championships. His mother and grandmother were reportedly in the stands when the accident occurred. As the teenager was being towed on the water's surface, a second boat crashed into him. 4 ambulance crews arrived on site via helicopter and took him to St. George Hospital with a fractured leg, a fractured arm, and extensive head injuries. Both boat drivers were taken to the hospital where they underwent mandatory tests for drugs or alcohol, and one of the boats was also towed by the police as part of the investigation. Number 5. Ryan Bergeron. Florida man Ryan Bergeron had started water skiing with his family at the age of 5. When he was only 13, he joined a performance troupe called the Sarasota Skieries. In the late 2000s, Bergeron took a job at a Brazilian theme park. In 2008, during the opening act of a performance, the 22-year-old was skiing barefoot and attempted a trick that involved flipping onto his back for a spin. Bergeron lost control during the turn and, as he let go of the tow rope, crashed into a seawall. He was rushed to a hospital with devastating injuries to his spinal cord. About a week later, doctors told him that he'd never walk again. Bergeron was hospitalized in Brazil for roughly a month as he recovered from spinal cord surgery. He would then undergo physical therapy in Atlanta. Even though he was unable to use his legs, Bergeron wanted to water ski again. He contacted an organization called You Can Ski Too, which taught skiing to people with disabilities. Bergeron learned to use a sit ski, a wakeboard with an aluminum cage that held his body in a tucked and seated position. After only a few sessions, he was reportedly capable of doing 360-degree turns. Number 4. Tony Van Dersen. In 2011, Tony Van Dersen, a champion water skier, died during a race on New Zealand's Lake Taupo. At the time, 57-year-old Van Dersen was competing in the Masters class of a national series. He'd reportedly reached speeds of over 95 miles per hour before he took a brutal fall and instantly broke his neck. Van Dersen passed away in the emergency room of Taupo Hospital. Only months before his tragic demise, his daughter, Olivia, had been involved in a similar accident. The 34-year-old, who held 10 national racing titles, narrowly avoided death and paralysis After she broke her neck, she recovered rapidly and returned to the sport. Olivia was training in Auckland at the time of her father's passing, and in the aftermath, stated an intention of permanently retiring from water ski racing. Number 3. Tim Driver. In 2010, a water skier lost his life following a crash at the Southern 80 event on the Murray River in Australia. The race, held annually on the second weekend in February, attracts hundreds of competitors from all over the world. The accident occurred only a few minutes into the tandem race portion of the event. 43-year-old Driver and his partner, also in his early 40s, both lost control after rounding a bend. As Driver let go of the rope, he overbalanced, and a ski struck him in the chest at high speed. His partner collided with the riverbank and sustained a broken collarbone, from which he ultimately recovered. Driver's injuries were severe, and after paramedics attempted to revive him for 45 minutes, he was pronounced dead at the scene. Aside from his fatal accident, the 2010 edition of Southern 80 was marred by several severe injuries. Among the reported incidents were 2 skiers who'd suffered broken legs and 2 others that had sustained neck injuries. Number 2. David Pareto. The tragic passing of Tim Driver was just one of several deaths reported throughout the Southern 80 water ski race's history. A few years prior, in 2007, David Pareto had entered a hairpin bend described as being among the worst sections of the race. The 36-year-old racer lost control after hitting a sandbar at high speed. He was launched in front of his skis and fell face first into waist-deep water. A local man saw the accident, which occurred about 50 feet from the river's edge. He went into the water and found Pareto floating face down, with blood pooling around him. The rescuer and his wife, who was a nurse, performed resuscitation until paramedics arrived in an ambulance helicopter. Unfortunately, Pareto's injuries proved too extensive, and he died before he could receive further medical support. Number 1. Amber Rangel. On July the 27th of 2014, Amber Rangel, a world-class barefoot water skier, was training for an upcoming competition. The 19-year-old was a defending champion in the trick section of the US Barefoot National Water Ski Championship. During her practice session, she suffered a life-altering accident while attempting a jump. On the approach, Rangel tripped on the water and lost her grip on the tow rope handle. She crashed head first into the ramp while going approximately 43 miles per hour. Had she not been wearing a helmet, Rangel would have most likely died on the spot. She bounced off the ramp and went flying several feet into the air. She'd broken her neck in several places and severely injured her left arm. Because of a C5 spinal cord injury, Rangel became a quadriplegic with only limited movement in her arms. Determined to return to the water, the young woman took up scuba diving less than a year later. She managed to do so through an organization called Dive Heart that specialized in adapting the activity for people with cognitive and physical disabilities. Her newfound passion eventually took Rangel to diving expeditions in Mexico, Honduras, and Iceland. Number 11. Shannon Hughes. In December of 2019, 47-year-old Shannon Hughes died after falling through the ice at a private pond in Shellsburg, Iowa. When Hughes failed to return from his trip, his family raised the alarm with local authorities. A passerby had reported seeing the man fishing on the ice, but mentioned that he later vanished. The bucket he'd been sitting on and his gear were still there. A hole measuring 3 to 4 feet across was later discovered in the vicinity. It's believed that Hughes had gotten up to stretch his legs or to look for a different fishing spot. After he'd taken a few steps, the ice gave way under his weight and he fell through. His lifeless body was pulled from the pond the following day. Number 10. Carissa Miller. In January of 2020, Carissa Miller was fishing with her best friend off the docks in Harrison County, Michigan. At some point, the woman lost her footing and slipped into Lake St. Clair. Miller's screams alerted her friend, who'd been fishing one dock over. The woman was unable to pull Miller out. After several minutes spent in the water, her lower half had gone numb, and she could no longer use her legs properly. 2 local fishermen rushed to her aid, but they too couldn't lift the woman out. While her friend went to get help, the fishermen tried to hold Miller's head above water. They also removed the woman's coat and sweater as they were floating around her face, choking her. Police officers arrived at the scene and Miller was rescued after spending around 15 minutes in the freezing water. She was left with frostbitten toes and a sore shoulder, but was expected to fully recover. The officer's body cam captured the incident, and Miller allowed the footage to be shared to warn of the dangers posed by ice fishing. Number 9. Clark Shoemaker and Dominic Arthur. In 2015, Clark Shoemaker and Dominic Arthur died after falling through the ice during a fishing trip to a rock quarry in rural Indiana. Emergency responders struggled to reach the teenagers, aged 17 and 13, by navigating through ice sheets and steep, rocky terrain. By the time they were pulled into a rescue boat, they had spent over 90 minutes in the water. The teens were taken to IU Health Bloomington, where they were later pronounced dead. According to the Department of Natural Resources, the ice was less than 3 inches thick when Shoemaker and Arthur broke through the surface. Warming temperatures in the area had further weakened it. While walking on frozen surfaces is never completely risk-free, the DNR stated that at least 4 inches of fresh, solid ice is considered safe for ice fishing. The department warned people to always check the thickness before venturing out. Number 8. Incident in Manitowoc. In February of 1989, 4 teenagers aged 16 to 17 died in a wooden shanty on the frozen Harpt Lake in Manitowoc, Wisconsin. The 7-by-6-foot wooden fishing hut was owned by the parents of one of the victims. The teens were all there with the permission of their parents to take part in an ice fishing derby. Many of those participating in the competition chose to spend the night on the lake, either in their cars or in temporary shelters. The teens were overcome by fumes from 2 portable propane heaters and a propane plate, which they'd left running inside overnight. Carbon monoxide poisoning was ruled as a cause of death for all 4 victims. At the end of the fishing contest, a moment of silence was held for their tragic passing. Number 7. Stranded fishermen in Wisconsin. In February of 2021, 66 anglers were rescued by the Coast Guard in collaboration with other agencies after 3 separate ice floes broke away from the shore in Sturgeon Bay, northeastern Wisconsin. The massive ice sheets had become separated due to high winds associated with an approaching winter storm. Fishing huts could be spotted from the shore as the floes slowly drifted away. During the 4-hour emergency operation, rescue swimmers dropped down from helicopters. They coordinated with local responders and the Coast Guard's ice boats. Fortunately, all 66 anglers were saved and none had sustained life-threatening injuries. Number 6. Snowmobile crashes into shanty. In February of 2021, an angler was killed after a snowmobile crashed into his fishing hut on a lake in Lenawee County, Michigan. The incident happened during the annual Tip-Up Festival at Devil's Lake, which featured a fishing contest as well as motorbike and snowmobile races. At around 7:30 p.m., the driver lost control of the vehicle and plowed into the temporary shelter. According to a police report, ice wasn't a factor in the crash, as at an estimated thickness of 6 inches, it was solid enough for both ice fishing and snowmobiling. The man inside the shanty, whose name wasn't released, suffered critical injuries and was pronounced dead at the scene. The driver of the snowmobile was also hurt in the crash but was reported as in a stable condition. It's unclear what had caused the accident, and the police launched an investigation to determine if alcohol had been a factor. Number 5. Utah man. In December of 2020, an unnamed man and his dog were rescued from the Mantua Reservoir in Utah after falling through the ice. The Mantua Police Department answered a call about someone drowning and found the 66-year-old Plain City man fighting for his life in the water. They threw him a rope, but pulling him out proved difficult as he was still attached to his fishing sled by a chest harness. One officer crawled to him and started taking apart the harness. The ice broke from under the rescuer as well, but he was able to swim back to a solid surface. After the safety line was attached, the officer and a colleague dragged the man and his pet out of the water. Both had been floating in freezing temperatures for over 15 minutes. However, after receiving professional medical care, they were pronounced in stable condition and expected to make a full recovery. Number 4. Chinese family. In February of 2015, a Chinese family narrowly escaped with their lives after their car started sinking in a lake near Changchun in the country's Jilin province. They had cut a hole in the ice and extended a fishing rod inside during a winter festival. As they waited for their catch, the family was keeping warm inside their Audi Q7 SUV, which was parked nearby. It's believed that heat from the vehicle's engine gradually melted the ice underneath it. The surface cracked, creating a hole in which the Audi began to sink. The family, 2 adults and 1 child, were able to get out at the last moment. The car with their belongings inside then disappeared beneath the surface. The family escaped unscathed, and the Audi was later recovered from the bottom of the lake. Number 3. Incoming icebreaker. In January of 2021, dozens of fishermen were forced to flee for their lives from a Russian icebreaker in the Gulf of Finland. The anglers had been reeling their lines through ice holes when the hulking vessel approached them. The Captain Plakin icebreaker was clearing the glacial sheets close to the Russian city of St. Petersburg. In order to facilitate winter navigation, ice fishing in the area was reported as illegal, and the hovercraft had been dispatched in order to warn the anglers. They hastily grabbed their gear and fled to shore as the Captain Plakin headed straight for them. Had they not moved out of its way in time, the collapsing ice would have caused them to fall into the freezing waters. The icebreaker weighed almost 2,500 tons, meaning it was about as heavy as 20 blue whales, and could cut through ice that was up to 4 feet thick. Some of the anglers argued that the captain should have been arrested due to his apparent disregard for human life. Fortunately, no serious injuries were reported. Number 2. Carl Lester. Carl Lester, an ice fisherman from Delta County, Michigan, died in January of 2021 after driving his ATV through a pressure crack on the ice. The incident occurred in northern Lake Michigan. 64-year-old Lester had failed to return from one of his regular fishing trips, so his wife asked a neighbor to help find him. The authorities were notified after the neighbor spotted a floating object on Big Bay Denok in the Upper Peninsula. 2 officials from the Michigan Department of Natural Resources arrived at the scene and went on the ice. They discovered Lester's lifeless body and brought it to shore. The ice was roughly 5 inches thick, but windy weather had caused a pressure crack, which separated a flow, exposing about 10 to 15 feet of water. It's believed that Lester was riding his ATV either to or from his ice shanty when he accidentally drove into the open water. Number 1. Stranded fishermen in Russia. In January of 2020, 600 Russian fishermen were rescued by the authorities after they'd become marooned on an ice sheet in the Sea of Okhotsk. While ignoring warnings of ice cracks in the frozen sea, they had become separated from shore by a fissure. The massive floe they were marooned on had drifted hundreds of feet from shore, and the fishermen were in danger of capsizing into the frigid water at any moment. Fortunately, a rescue operation was swiftly mounted, involving multiple boats and a hovercraft. The emergency responders threw a line to the fishermen and pulled them onto firmer ice on the shore. This was achieved in part by using smaller pieces of ice as rafts. According to local reports, the rescue operation took nearly 2 days, but no fatalities were reported and none of the anglers had been seriously injured. They were subsequently criticized by the authorities for disregarding repeated warnings about fishing in the area. This was one of 3 incidents over the course of a single week in which people had to be rescued from drifting glacial masses in the Sakhalin region. In a separate incident, 536 fishermen were saved following a 7-hour operation after becoming stranded in similar conditions. Number 8. Amy Copeland. In May of 2012, Amy Copeland and a couple of her friends decided to spend a day on the bank of a local river in Carrollton, Georgia. They found a homemade zip line suspended about 6 feet above the water. On Copeland's second turn, the wire snapped and she took a hard fall. A bleeding gash opened up in her left calf. Doctors closed the wound, which required 22 stitches, but it would be just the beginning of Copeland's ordeal. Several days later, the 24-year-old developed necrotizing fasciitis, a flesh-eating bacteria infection. To save her life, doctors had to amputate portions of all 4 of Copeland's limbs. She lost both arms below the elbow, her left leg up to her hip, and her right leg below the knee. The long road to recovery was arduous, but Copeland would ultimately become an inspiration to everyone around her. She relearned all the outdoor activities she once loved, like biking, kayaking, and swimming. Copeland also obtained a master's degree in social work and started a foundation dedicated to helping people with disabilities reconnect with the world. Number 7. Lisa Lamb. In 2016, Lisa Lamb suffered fatal injuries in a zip-lining accident in Utah. The 55-year-old woman from South Carolina was going anywhere from 30 to 60 miles per hour when the top of a tree suddenly broke off and fell onto the path of the zip line. Lamb collided with the obstacle and died within minutes after suffering multiple broken ribs and internal injuries. She was found unconscious and not breathing while still suspended from her harness. A coroner listed the official cause of death as blunt force trauma. The zipline operator wasn't held responsible, as there was no way they could have foreseen or prepared for such an incident. Number 6. Tina Werner. 59-year-old Tina Werner was trying out ziplining as part of her bucket list when she took a fatal fall. She chose Go Ape Zipline and Treetop Adventure, Delaware. According to the operator, the elderly woman had taken part in the 30-minute safety training session prior to climbing onto the platform. As she did so, however, Werner lost her balance and somehow became detached from her harness. She fell from an estimated 35 feet and died from multiple blunt force trauma injuries. Number 5. Dean Sanderson. After visiting their son at the Army Academy, Dean Sanderson and his wife Shannon decided to go ziplining at the jungle surfing canopy north of Cairns, Australia. They were on the line that had the longest drop. They'd reached about the middle of the lane when the cable snapped, leaving both of them to plummet towards the rainforest floor 50 feet below. Another couple who was waiting their turn behind them struggled to recover after witnessing the incident. They remember the cable twanging back into the air as it ruptured and Shannon letting out a terrifying scream as she fell. She'd suffered spine injuries and was airlifted to a hospital where her condition was pronounced as stable. 50-year-old Dean died on impact. He was first on the line, and it's believed that the weight of his body had helped break Shannon's fall. Number 4. Robert Cadman. Robert Cadman is among the first zipline-related fatalities in recorded history. In 18th century England, the man worked as a steeplejack. This meant that he climbed chimneys and other tall structures to carry out repairs. Cadman was also an entertainer who performed daring feats such as tightrope walking and ziplining. In Dover, he'd reportedly ziplined from a high cliff across the harbour and into the street. In Shrewsbury, he attached a rope to the top of the 223-foot spire at St Mary's Church and connected the other end to an anchor on the ground. He performed tricks as he walked the 820-foot distance across these points. Then, once at the top of the spire, Cadman would zipline to the ground while wearing a wooden breastplate with a central groove. He put on these performances from 1711 to 1739. Then, in early February of 1739, Cadman would suffer a fatal accident. Cadman took a devastating fall as the rope broke. He was buried in St Mary's, where a plaque in his memory can still be found to this day. Number 3. Egale Tishman. While honeymooning in Honduras, Israeli man Egale Tishman suffered fatal injuries during a ziplining tour. As Tishman took his turn, he didn't realize that his wife, 27-year-old Shiv Fankin, was stuck about halfway down. What followed was a high-speed collision that left the couple with severe injuries. It's unclear what lane the couple was gliding down, but some of the attraction's zip lines were suspended up to 300 feet above ground. Fankin was airlifted to a hospital where doctors managed to stabilize her condition. Tishman unfortunately suffered fatal brain hemorrhage. Number 2. Spencer Donaldson. A Canadian tourist visiting northern Thailand died while ziplining after the cable he was attached to snapped. 25-year-old Spencer Donaldson was gliding down an attraction called Flight of the Gibbon, which counts itself among the longest zip lines in Asia. The cable failed soon after he'd left the platform at the start of the course. According to local reports, Donaldson fell from over 330 feet and tumbled down a hill. The accident ended his life and an investigation was subsequently launched. It seems that the man was only attached to 3 cables, while safety requirements needed 8. Donaldson reportedly weighed around 275 pounds, and on the attraction's website, riders were required to weigh less. It's these aspects that seem to indicate a degree of fatal negligence on the operator's part. Number 1. Patricia Rabaliza. In May of 2014, a Maui woman fell 150 feet to her death in a zipline accident near Piolo Ranch. 29-year-old Patricia Rabaliza worked for the operator, Piolo Ranch Zipline, as a guide. Rescuers rushed to the site of the accident but had a hard time getting to her because of the wet and rough terrain. She was ultimately pronounced dead at the scene. A police investigation later revealed the circumstances surrounding the woman's accident. Rabaliza was working on a platform without being attached to a safety harness. A rider moving fast struck the springs at the end of a zipline and was propelled backwards. Rabaliza tried to secure the rider and pull them back, but instead, both were pulled away from the platform. The woman held onto the rider for as long as she could, but ultimately lost her grip and suffered a deadly drop. Number 7. Loic Leferme. Loic Leferme was a freediving pioneer and a co-founder of AIDA, a worldwide regulating body for competitive events involving breath holding. A former world record breaker, Leferme at one point dove to 561 feet without the use of a breathing apparatus. At such a depth, the Great Pyramid of Giza would be completely submerged. In April of 2007, Leferme was training off the coast of southeastern France. His record had recently been broken, which motivated Leferme to push himself harder than ever before. Unfortunately, as he attempted resurface, his counterweight system failed. He was brought to the surface unresponsive, and resuscitation attempts, which lasted a reported 45 minutes, were ultimately unsuccessful in saving his life. Number 6. Audrey Mestre. Audrey Mestre was only 2 years old when she earned her first gold medal in swimming. By age 13, she was already a seasoned scuba diver. Her interest in freediving grew in the late 1990s after she met husband Fernando Ferreras, who would also become her instructor. Mestre would go on to break the female freedive world record at 410 feet, which she later extended by 17 feet. The distance is significantly longer than a football field. In 2002, Mestre dove to 560 feet in an attempt to set a new world record. However, as she opened a valve on an airbag that was supposed to rapidly take her to the surface, it didn't inflate. Mestre would spend roughly 9 minutes underwater as another diver in the team struggled to help her. She was unconscious upon resurfacing and was later pronounced dead. Ferreras was severely criticizing the incident's aftermath, as he'd reportedly rushed and underfunded her record attempt. The safety equipment was lacking, there was a shortage of rescue divers, and there were no doctors on standby. Number 5. Natalia Molchanova. Natalia Molchanova was already an accomplished swimmer before she took the freediving world by storm. At age 40, Molchanova would ultimately be known as one of history's greatest freedivers. Throughout her career, she earned 23 gold medals and held 41 world records. In August of 2015, Molchanova was given a private lesson off the Spanish island of Formentera. Without weights, the athlete dove to about 131 feet. Tragically, Molchanova didn't resurface and her body was never found. According to Spain's civil code, anyone who's declared missing at sea is presumed dead 3 months after the initial report. No one knows for sure what happened to Molchanova, but the general assumption is that a strong current took her down and then out to sea. Number 4. Nicolas Mevoli. Nicolas Mevoli started freediving competitively in 2012 and only a year later achieved an American record. During an event in late 2013, Mevoli suffered barrel trauma at a depth of 260 feet and had to abandon his dive. Barrel trauma occurs as a buildup of gases that overstretches bodily tissues to the point that they rupture. He survived that attempt, but a few days later went for 236 feet on a single breath. At one point during the attempt, it appeared as if Mevoli had changed his mind and tried turning back. Still, he then decided to continue downward and resurfaced after 3 minutes and 38 seconds underwater. Within a few moments, he lost consciousness. Mevoli later succumbed to complications of pulmonary edema and was the first athlete to die in an international freediving competition. Number 3. Igor Petrenko and Mingalim Sebaev, along with 3 of their friends, were on a fishing trip to New Zealand's Great Barrier Island. Both Petrenko and Sebaev had their freediving gear with them. Even though it was dark, there were no currents, and clear skies provided ample moonlight. Petrenko dove in the water and decided to keep swimming alone after one of his companions returned to the boat. Several minutes had passed before the men realized Petrenko hadn't resurfaced. They started looking for him and noticed what appeared to be his torchlight on the seabed. Sebaev made several attempts to reach Petrenko. He saw his body but couldn't dive deep enough to reach him. Sebaev then put on his weight belt and went down again. The others saw his torchlight spiral as he rapidly descended. When he failed to resurface, the men called emergency services. Both men had drowned, and their bodies were recovered about 16 feet apart. It's believed that alcohol and excessive weight in their belts had played a role in their demise. Number 2. Alexander Seymour. 32-year-old marine biologist Alexander Seymour had been living and working in the island country of Cape Verde for 7 years. He conducted research into the local sharks and rays, while also educating fishermen about them. In July of 2019, Seymour and his team traveled to the island of Sal in order to tag tiger sharks as part of their conservation work. As the others returned to the boat, Seymour went into the water for one more dive. It was then that he suffered a fatal episode of barotrauma. He drowned and his body later resurfaced, much to the horror of his team. Number 1. Alex Pullen. Two-time world champion snowboarder Alex Pullen died while spearfishing off a beach on Queensland's Gold Coast. A few days prior to his death, he'd shared pictures on his social media of himself spearfishing underwater. On July the 8th of 2020, the Australian athlete wasn't wearing any breathing apparatus as he was freediving on the reef. At some point, he suffered a blackout and subsequently drowned. A snorkeler found his body and raised the alarm with the local lifeguards. When news of the tragic incident broke, many of the 32-year-old supporters expressed their condolences online, and some mourners made their way to the beach to lay flowers in his memory. Number 8. Mark Fu. Mark Fu was at one point referred to as a surfing demigod. He achieved that status in January of 1984 when he ventured into the swell at Hawaii's Waimea Bay and rode waves which onlookers claim were in excess of 60 feet. A crashing wave broke his surfboard and he had to be rescued via helicopter, but he emerged from the crash otherwise unharmed. It's perhaps due to Fu's mythical standing in the surfing world that his death in 1994 shook the community. While riding a 20-foot wave at Mavericks, Fu experienced a seemingly harmless wipeout. As he tumbled underwater, the leash of his surfboard got caught in some rocks, and the current of an overhead wave prevented him from releasing his ankle strap. Fu's lifeless body was found in a lagoon a few hours later, with drowning and blunt force trauma to the head subsequently determined as the cause of death. Number 7. Alec Cook. Due to his daredevil attitude and appetite for giant waves, Alec Cook was known as the Evel Knievel of surfing. A photograph taken in the 1980s of Cook surfing became one of Hawaii's best-selling postcards, with a caption that read, "The biggest wave." The man, nicknamed Ace Cool, was reportedly a descendant of British explorer Captain James Cook, who first documented surfing in the 18th century. In 2015, the surfer went surfing at night to revel in a 30-foot swell at Oahu's North Shore. When Cook didn't return to his Waialua home, his girlfriend reported him missing. Cook was never seen again, and in spite of an extensive search, his body wasn't recovered. He's believed to have drowned due to an accident, since he was considered too experienced to have simply fallen prey to the currents. Number 6. Donnie Solomon. Donnie Solomon was a talented big wave surfer and an avid supporter of the Red Cross, who encouraged others to undergo CPR and first aid training. In December of 1995, while surfing in Hawaii's Waimea Bay, Solomon had gone about 2/3 up the face of a wave. Unfortunately, the wave then broke and the surfer was thrown backwards over the lip. The impact knocked him unconscious. As he emerged from the water, efforts to revive him proved fruitless. Number 5. Sean Dollar. Sean Dollar is a big wave legend that, in spite of taking on some tremendous swells, had his own near-death experience in 2015. In 2011 at Mavericks, Dollar paddled into a record-breaking wave of 55 feet. The following year at Cortez Bank, he improved upon his record by catching a 63-feet wave. That's nearly twice as tall as a telephone pole. Dollar's performances rivaled those of the best tow-in surfers. In 2015, however, Dollar was surfing off the coast of Central California. He suffered a devastating wipeout in waves that were larger than 25 feet. As a result, he broke his neck in 4 places and sustained a concussion. Fortunately, he still managed to reach fellow surfers, who cared for him until he was taken to a hospital. Doctors claimed it was a miracle that the surfer hadn't severed his spinal cord. Number 4. Sion Miloski. Big wave surfer Sion Miloski died in March of 2011 after he was caught in a massive swell at Mavericks. Measuring anywhere from 50 to 60 feet, the waves were huge even by the popular spot standards. Miloski was reportedly having a spectacular session, as he'd caught at least 6 waves. Unfortunately, in one of his subsequent attempts, the lip of the wave came crashing down on him. He was pushed under and another huge wave then rolled over him. The 2-wave hold down proved too much for Miloski. About 20 minutes later, his lifeless body was found floating at the mouth of a harbor, about a mile from the break. Number 3. Greg Long. Greg Long is known as one of the best big wave surfers in the world. He's won numerous competitions including various Red Bull events and the Quicksilver Big Wave Invitational. Long is also the most decorated surfer in the Billabong XXL Global Big Wave Awards. In 2012, Long paddled into a 50-foot wave at Cortez Bank, a spot about 100 miles off the coast of Southern California. The 34-year-old wiped out and was pushed deep underwater. His prototype inflatable life vest then failed to deploy. As he scrambled to pull on the leash and get back to his floating surfboard, 2 more waves came crashing down. Long had only survived the triple hold down due to the swift intervention of his rescue crew, who found him floating face down. He held his breath underwater for so long that his lungs bled. When he was brought into the boat, barely conscious, he coughed up blood and salt water. The surfer subsequently stated that while he recovered physically rather rapidly, the experience had changed both the way he surfed and the way he lived. Number 2. Todd Chesser. Todd Chesser was an influential big wave surfer who, in February of 1997, drowned off the coast of Oahu. The 28-year-old was supposed to be in Maui and perform a stunt for a movie, but decided to stay behind as the waves were picking up. He was surfing with a few of his friends at a spot called Alligator Rock, which is an outer reef to the west of Waimea. Chesser got caught in a fast-moving 25-foot wave. According to his friends, Chesser had tried to dive down and under one of the incoming waves, but was held down for too long. His friends tried to help, but another large wave separated them. Chesser was found later that day in Waimea Bay and was pronounced dead at an Oahu hospital. Number 1. Kirk Passmore. In November of 2014, Kirk Passmore and a few of his friends were surfing waves in the 25 to 30 foot range at Alligator Rock. In spite of the raging swell, Passmore wasn't wearing an inflatable flotation device, as he reportedly found them cumbersome. Former big wave champion Jamie Sterling was surfing with Passmore at the time. According to him, Passmore wiped out inside a massive wave. Sterling believed that he'd perhaps ruptured his eardrum, broken his neck, or lost his equilibrium because he emerged face down. A second wave then struck, broke Passmore's surfboard, and carried him away. The others stopped their session and looked for him, but his body was never recovered. Number 9. Ming Chan. Ming Chan, a Chinese traveler, visited Guadalupe Island in Mexico, one of the most popular destinations for shark lovers. He was the only one in the reinforced cage when a shark was attracted to the chum placed just outside the bars. It lunged at the piece of tuna, only to accidentally crash against the metal rods. It managed to enter the cage, much to Chan's horror. The wild animal actually swam by Chan's side for over 20 seconds. The diver tried his best to keep some distance, while the boat's crew frantically attempted to help him. It was only when the top was opened that the shark could finally swim away. A video of the entire encounter shows the beast bleeding profusely, having injured itself during the struggle. Luckily, Chan survived the potentially deadly encounter. Number 8. Great white shark death. During what seemed to be an ordinary cage diving experience, a great white shark got trapped after savagely colliding with the enclosure's metal bars. The incident, like many others in the list, happened in Guadalupe Island, which is considered one of the most important great white sanctuaries in the world. 4 divers watched from inside the cage as the shark fruitlessly struggled to break free. It soon began bleeding profusely, but there was nothing to do but wait for the wild animal to escape. The shark was badly injured during the struggle and bled to death. After 25 minutes, the predator finally broke free with blood oozing from its gills. Soon after, it stopped moving and its corpse dropped to the ocean floor. Number 7. Mark Curry. Mark Curry was vacationing in South Africa when he decided to go shark diving. He noticed an 18-foot white shark and that it kept circling the boat. It was only after the massive animal began to ram and bite at the cage's bars that the British man realized he needed to get out as soon as possible. The boat's captain attempted to distract the shark, but it seemed set on reaching Curry. It wasn't until the beast was struck on the head with an iron pole that Curry was given enough respite to swim off the top of the cage. He was rushed up onto the boat, while the shark kept trying to get him. Fortunately, Mark Curry survived his ordeal thanks to the crew's fast thinking. He would later recount how he feared drowning or being viciously mauled by the raging shark. Number 6. Craig Bovim. Craig Bovim wasn't diving inside a cage when he was attacked by a great white shark, but he blames his injury on this activity. Bovim, an avid snorkeler, was searching for lobster at Scarborough. This area is well known to shark diving aficionados, and several boats dedicated to this practice can be found along the region's coast. He was bitten by a great white shark and barely managed to make it out alive. Bovim considers that chumming is to blame for his injuries, as it has radically altered sharks' behavior. These animals are, according to the attack victim, more prone to approach human beings in search of food and more violent when failing to receive it. Number 5. Nancy Lasuzo. Nancy Lasuzo was vacationing in Mexico when she visited Guadalupe Islands, a popular tourist attraction. While there, she decided to go cage diving and recorded the whole experience. As she was being lowered underwater, a great white shark swam straight towards the cage Lasuzo was in. Unable or unwilling to change course in time, it began pushing against the bars, trying to break inside. Nancy would fortunately survive the encounter and recorded it all, including the tense moments of the shark gnawing at the cage's bars. In the end, the young diver managed to escape unscratched but shaken up. Number 4. Roger Gray. After getting married, Roger Gray felt the need to participate in some adrenaline-inducing experiences during the first day of his honeymoon. It happened back in 2013, while the newlyweds were enjoying their trip to South Africa. He decided to go alone on one of the area's most popular extreme activities, shark diving. While underwater, he encountered several different sharks. However, one seemed particularly violent and decided to ignore the bait being dangled outside the bars. Instead, it managed to get its head inside the cage and started biting around wildly. Gray ducked in time and avoided the shark's massive serrated teeth. Eventually, the monstrous marine animal swam away, and Gray was able to return to his honeymoon, none the worse for wear. Number 3. Katie Yonker. Katie Yonker and 3 other friends had spent little time underwater, protected by the thick bars of the shark tank, when they saw a 15-foot specimen swimming nearby. Without warning, the great white shark lunged at their air supply, creating an explosion. Moments later, it got stuck in the bars. The incident occurred in the Mexican region of Baja, California. Unable to breathe and trapped with a massive beast thrashing around, the divers had to react quickly. One of them swam up to alert the crew that they needed to pull up the cage. Once that happened, the trapped tourists could breathe, but the shark couldn't escape. The crew helped the tourists get out one by one before tying a rope around the shark's tail. By submerging the cage back underwater and pulling on the knotted rope, they managed to help the grand large beast separate itself from the cage. Number 2. Jeff Kerr and Andy Casagrande. Back in 2015, Jeff Kerr and Andy Casagrande were determined to get footage of a rumored 20-foot long shark. They had been filming in several locations while trying to finish their documentary on the subject. The next point in their agenda was New Zealand. At first, things didn't seem to go right for Kerr and Casagrande. Upon entering the underwater cage, several sharks approached them. Their attitudes were markedly aggressive, as they were whipping their tails against the bars and circling the 2 filmmakers repeatedly. The sharks started hammering the cage with their noses, but then everything went quiet. The beast swam away swiftly, almost as if to indicate that something bigger was approaching. Kerr and Casagrande were shocked to see the 20-foot shark swimming nearby. They recorded as the animal attacked the cage over and over again. In the end, after failing to break inside the cage, the shark gave up and swam away. No injuries were sustained by the documentary makers. Number 1. Marcus Groh. Marcus Groh was devoted to his work and wanted to get great pictures of the sharks he'd be swimming around. It was one of the reasons why he refused to slide into a cage in order to keep out of harm's way and remain safe. Instead, Groh decided that he'd be diving among the sharks in their natural state with nothing between the massive predators and his own body. During one such session, a bull shark attempted to bite the bait Groh had used to attract animals to his location. Instead, it accidentally attacked the diver's leg. Moments later, and realizing its mistake, it let go and swam away. Groh suffered from severe blood loss and was rushed to a Miami hospital via a Coast Guard helicopter. Doctors did everything in their power to save him, but in the end, he died as a result of his wound. Number 10. Shiloh Shahan. In September of 2016, Shiloh Shahan narrowly avoided death after jumping off one of the tallest waterfalls in Hawaii. The 21-year-old California native was visiting Wailua Falls with his friends when he spontaneously decided to leap from the top. The waterfall stands at 173 feet, according to some sources, and diving off it has been deemed illegal due to several deaths that have occurred. After a short runoff, Shahan launched himself over the brink. A loud thud was heard as the young man impacted the water. As he made contact with the pool below, Shahan lost consciousness and then started floating face down. He would have most likely drowned if not for the quick intervention of 2 tourists who pulled him out of the water. Aside from tears in the muscles on his chest and back, the man also suffered a concussion. After taking some time to recover, he walked away from the jump on his own. He would later claim in an interview that he took the risky leap because he was at a pivotal point in his life and it had felt like the right thing to do. Number 9. Emily Hutchinson. In early 2021, the emergency services were called to Barron Gorge National Park in Queensland, following reports that a woman had fallen down a waterfall during a hike. A helicopter made several sweeps of the area while the police hiked for over an hour to reach the victim, 31-year-old Emily Hutchinson. Officers performed CPR at the scene, and Hutchinson was airlifted to Cairns Base Hospital, where she was later pronounced dead. Initial descriptions of the incident were proven false after the authorities talked with the woman's partner. She hadn't slipped and fallen, but instead was knocked unconscious at the bottom of the waterfall. Several boulders had become dislodged from the top and rolled down, striking the woman in the head and inflicting devastating injuries. Number 8. Shane Brown. In December of 2015, daredevil Shane Brown suffered horrific injuries after jumping off Kapena Falls in Hawaii. The 24-year-old attempted a triple gainer, which involves jumping forward and then transitioning to back somersaults. While rotating in the air, the Honolulu native clipped his head on the edge of the cliff, which caused him to release his tucked position as he landed in the water. In doing so, he struck a submerged tree trunk with his back. A friend pulled Brown out of the water and he was rushed to Queens Hospital. The doctors told the daredevil that he was extremely fortunate the stunt hadn't left him paralyzed. Brown had shattered both shoulder blades as well as his right shoulder socket. He also broke 14 ribs and his L1 vertebrae. Over a dozen stitches were clipped into his skull to mend a gash on his head. Eventually, after a recovery period of several months, he was able to swim again. Number 7. Soipov Abdulok. In September of 2020, an Uzbekistan tourist trying to take a selfie atop a waterfall in Thailand fell 50 feet to his death. 22-year-old Soipov Abdulok, along with other backpackers, rented motorbikes in Phuket and traveled 230 miles to a park to view the scenery. Abdulok ignored signs that warned against climbing the waterfall, as he reportedly wanted a selfie with it in the background. Yet as he strayed from the marked trail, the young man slipped on a rock and fell. His companions found him on the jagged rocks below with blood pouring from his mouth and nose. According to Thai authorities, his death had been very quick. Number 6. Sydney Kayaker. In the summer of 2018, a Sydney kayaker died while trying to paddle over a waterfall in far north Queensland. The The unnamed 37-year-old man and several of his friends were kayaking at the Wurrunurrun National Park. He'd gone over the brink but got pinned to some rocks in an air pocket as water rushed over him. The isolated section of the rapids that he was on could only be accessed by river or air. His friends couldn't reach him and spent the night with emergency services on the riverbank. Rescuers believed that he was still alive as of 6 p.m. The authorities knew the kayaker was trapped in an air pocket but had no means of communicating with him. Daylight was fading and navigating the river in the dark was deemed too treacherous. Rescuers returned the following morning, but it wasn't until the afternoon that they were able to reach the kayaker. Unfortunately, by then, it was too late. Number 5. Robert Overacker. On October the 2nd of 1995, 39-year-old Robert Overacker died after riding a jet ski off the brink of Horseshoe Falls on the Niagara River. The man from Camarillo, California, performed the stunt to raise awareness for the homeless. Upon reaching the edge of the waterfall, Overacker let go of his watercraft with the intention of deploying a rocket-propelled parachute on his back. Something, however, had gone horribly wrong. It's unclear if the thrusters had gotten wet or if the parachute had somehow become detached from his body. Overacker plummeted nearly 170 feet into the waterfall's turbulent waters. At first, it was believed that he'd survived the drop, but it later emerged that his flailing limbs were being moved by the rapids. Overacker's body was recovered from the river by staff from the Maid of the Mist sightseeing boat tour. Number 4. Roy George Tinashe de Kenya. In January of 2021, Roy George Tinashe de Kenya plummeted to his death from one of the tallest points on Victoria Falls, on the border between Zambia and Zimbabwe. The cataract waterfall is believed to be among the largest in the world, due to its width of over 5,600 feet. Originally from the Zimbabwean capital of Harare, 40-year-old de Kenya had lived in Victoria Falls for a year and was familiar with the surroundings. On New Year's Day, he was visiting the site with his girlfriend and several other companions. De Kenya was walking parallel to the edge of the gorge, but recent rains had contributed to the surfaces being slippery. De Kenya took a misstep and then slid on the rocks, unable to catch his grip, fatally dropping an estimated 350 feet. While others had died at Victoria Falls before, according to a spokesperson for the Zimbabwe Parks and Wildlife Management Authority, the incident marked the first time that someone had fallen into the gorge. The swollen Zambezi River hindered attempts to recover de Kenya's body. His remains were lifted back over the cliff edge with a zip line and pulley system in a complex operation involving miners, the military, and other volunteers. Number 3. William Hill Jr. Born in Niagara Falls, Ontario in 1888, William Red Hill would come to be known as a local hero. He received his first bravery medal at the age of 8 when he rescued his sister from their burning house. Hill worked as a rescuer on the Niagara River, ultimately credited for saving 28 lives while recovering numerous accident and suicide victims. The man was obsessed with the power of the raging river and its unforgiving waterfalls. He first braved its lower rapids in 1930 in a 600-pound, 6-foot-long steel barrel. Hill would journey down the rapids 3 more times before his death in 1942, solidifying his reputation as a daredevil. William Hill Jr. inherited his father's fascination with the Niagara River and repeated his death-defying acts. His aim was to raise funds in a memorial fund to honor his father. He eventually attempted a stunt that even William Sr. had avoided by taking a barrel over Horseshoe Falls, the largest waterfall on the river. His unique contraption, which he'd named The Thing, consisted of large inflated tubes encased by fish netting and held together by canvas webbing. On August the 5th of 1951, before a crowd of thousands, Hill Jr. set off on the river. The trip initially went according to plan, as The Thing rode the upper rapids and then went over the brink of the waterfall. Moments later, the stunt abruptly ended in tragedy. The barrel dropped 167 feet and shattered upon impact. Hill Jr. suffered fatal injuries and his battered body was recovered the following day. Number 2. YouTube stars take fatal fall. In July of 2018, 3 Canadian YouTube vloggers died at a waterfall in British Columbia. Riker Gamble, Alexei Lyack, and Megan Scraper were part of High on Life, an adventure traveling channel that would often feature its members performing daring stunts in exotic locations. In the past, Gamble, Lyack, and other members of their collective were banned from US federal land for 5 years after they pled guilty to walking on a sensitive hot spring in Yellowstone National Park. In early July, they were swimming atop Canada's Shannon waterfall, where rescue crews claimed the danger level was very high. It's unclear whether or not they were filming at the site. At some point, Scraper, Lyack's longtime partner, slipped over the edge and fell nearly 100 feet into one of the lower pools. While trying to help her, Gamble and Lyack were also swept over the brink. All three were fatally wounded in the drop. Number 1. Charles Stevens. On July the 11th of 1920, Charles Stevens became the first person to die going over Horseshoe Falls at Niagara in a barrel. Stevens worked as a barber and had started doing stunts to support his wife and 11 children. The man, who was known as the Demon Barber of Bedminster, believed that going over Horseshoe was a cool commercial proposition. Stevens's contraption consisted of an oak barrel with an anvil inside it, being used for ballast. The 58-year-old had been advised by fellow Niagara daredevil William Hill Sr. to test the barrel prior to the stunt, but decided to ignore his counsel. Stevens strapped himself to the barrel and his feet to the anchor, which would ultimately prove to be a fatal decision. His contraption was carried by the rapids over the brink and plunged towards the raging waters below. As it impacted the surface, the anvil broke through the bottom of the barrel. Because he was connected to the weight, Stevens was dragged into deep water. The only part of his body to be recovered was his severed right arm, which was buried at a cemetery in Niagara Falls. Would you go down Niagara's Horseshoe Falls in a barrel for $1 million? Let us know in the comments section below.